The galaxy was dimming, not in the way that mortals might notice. The stars still shone in the cold night of space, their fire burning indifferent to the petty struggles of empires. But to those who had walked its breadth for centuries, who had witnessed the ascension and decay of worlds, the truth was plain. The light of unity was dying. Great fleets returned not in triumph, but in silence. Worlds that had once sung the imperial creed now echoed only with static and ash. Even the void itself seemed quieter, as if it were holding its breath for the inevitable collapse. Among the fading embers of this age stood Fulgrim, the Phoenician, primarch of the Emperor's children. He was a vision of beauty wrought in flesh and steel, a figure who could have been carved by the very gods. His was the face of a savior, the bearing of a conqueror, and yet, within the gilded cage of his immortality, there stirred a restlessness he could not name. For all his victories, for all the perfection he demanded of himself and his legion, a question had begun to gnaw at him. Was perfection ever truly attainable, or was it only a cruel illusion? Ships moved silently beyond the viewport of his flagship, pride of the Emperor, their hulls bearing the proud violet and gold of his legion. They had fought for decades in the Emperor's name, crossing the galaxy to bring the dream of unity to its fractured children. Yet as Fulgrim watched them, he could not help but see the hairline cracks beneath the paint, the scars of battles fought not only against alien foes, but against doubts and ambitions that had no place in the Emperor's great vision. And here, perhaps, lies the irony of perfection. It does not tolerate stagnation. It demands more, always more. And for Fulgrim, more had begun to take on shapes and colours the Emperor had never intended. We truly love and care for you, dear listener, for it is through your presence that these old histories find breath again. Before we begin the story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now grab your coffee and let's get started. The last great war Fulgrim's legion had fought should have been a cause for celebration. The enemy, a coalition of machine intellects and mercenary fleets, had been annihilated. The Emperor's children had moved with surgical grace, each maneuver executed as though in a dance. Fulgrim himself had taken to the field, his blade singing through steel and flesh alike. And yet, when the last enemy vessel had been reduced to drifting wreckage, there was no fire in his soul. Victory had tasted like stale wine. It was during the return voyage from that war that Fulgrim began to hear it. Not a sound exactly, but a resonance, a note buried deep within the marrow of his mind. At first, it was nothing more than a stray thought, a flicker of inspiration. But soon it began to grow, weaving itself into his dreams, painting visions across the dark canvas of his sleep. He told himself it was nothing, battle fatigue, the product of a mind weary from endless campaigns. But the visions persisted. They showed him worlds more beautiful than any the Imperium had claimed. They showed him works of art wrought from the very bones of dead gods. They showed him a galaxy where perfection was not limited by the Emperor's cold, rigid ideal, but by the limits of imagination alone. Fulgrim knew he should have spoken of these visions, perhaps to the Emperor himself. But something in him resisted, not out of fear, but out of pride. Pride in the thought that perhaps he had been chosen for something greater. The Emperor's vision was grand, yes, but could it not be improved? The pride of the Emperor made birth above the fortress world of Sithara, a jewel of marble cities and silver oceans. It had been awarded to the Emperor's children decades ago, a monument to their devotion. Here, Fulgrim walked among the gardens and galleries that his warriors had built, each structure striving to embody the perfection they worshipped. And yet, even here, Fulgrim's gaze found fault, imperfections in the marble, a discordant note in the fountain's song. That night, the visions came again. Only now they spoke. The voice was smooth, rich, and warm, like the whisper of silk over skin. It told him that the galaxy was incomplete, that the Emperor, for all his power, had chosen to leave it unfinished, and that only Fulgrim, the Phoenix, the Lord of Perfection, could complete it. When he awoke, his hands were trembling. He stood at his window, staring into the void where the stars burned. The resonance was stronger now, a melody just beyond hearing. He knew, with the certainty of prophecy, that following it would change everything. He also knew that to ignore it would leave him hollow for eternity. And so, Fulgrim stood at the precipice, not of war, for war had been his life, but of transformation. Around him, the galaxy spiraled towards chaos. Within him, the seeds of something far more dangerous had been sown. The Emperor's children would follow him anywhere. The question was, where would he lead them? He closed his eyes, and for just a moment, thought he could hear the faint laughter of the stars. The halls of the pride of the Emperor were alive with whispers and the faint clang of artist tools. Marble statues shimmered under the flicker of torchlight, their faces frozen in eternal grace. The Emperor's children prided themselves not only on martial prowess, but on the perfection of every detail, from their armor's gleam to the harmony of their movements in battle. To them, war was not merely destruction, it was a masterpiece. Fulgrim moved through these corridors like a conductor guiding an orchestra, each gesture purposeful, each word weighted with the promise of perfection. Yet beneath his confident facade, a subtle storm brewed, a quiet, gnawing unease that clung to the edges of his mind. His legion was his family, his reflection, his greatest creation. Within their ranks were warriors and artisans whose loyalty was as flawless as the blades they wielded. But even within this sanctum of beauty, fissures began to appear. Julius Caesaron, his first captain, was a man of iron will and exacting standards. Where Fulgrim saw boundless potential, Julius saw flaws to be corrected, obstacles to be removed. Their conversations often spiraled into debates of philosophy and purpose, Fulgrim yearning for transcendence through art, Julius demanding absolute discipline and obedience. Perfection is not a goal to be wished for, Julius said one evening in the gallery of the Primarch's chambers, his voice low but firm. It is a chain we must forge and bind ourselves to. Without restraint, desire becomes decadence, and decadence is death. Fulgrim, reclining on a dais of a white marble, met his captain's gaze evenly. And yet, Julius, is restraint not a prison? Must we not push beyond the boundaries set by others if we are to truly create greatness? Their exchange was more than a debate. It was a dance of shadows, each probing the other's vulnerabilities, testing loyalties. Fulgrim's ambition shimmered with a light that Julius both admired and feared. The Primarch's restless spirit sought beauty and freedom. Julius sought it in order. Among others in Fulgrim's circle was Eidolon, the master of ceremonies and keeper of the Legion's histories. He was a scholar, a poet, a keeper of secrets. Eidolon alone had seen the Primarch in moments of solitude, when the mask of divinity slipped and revealed the man beneath, the man who wondered if the endless quest for perfection might be his undoing. It is the nature of all great things to crumble eventually, Eidolon confided one night, pouring amber wine into a delicate crystal goblet. No matter how brightly the flame burns, the ashes always follow. Fulgrim's smile was distant, almost sorrowful. Then it is our task to burn ever brighter, to leave a light that no shadow can ever extinguish. But shadows gathered nonetheless. The arrival of a strange relic, discovered amid the ruins of a forgotten world on the fringes of the galaxy, shifted the balance of the Emperor's children. The artifact was exquisite, a delicate lattice of shimmering metal intertwined with veins of a pulsating alien crystal. It sang softly in the hands of those sensitive to the warp's hidden melodies. To Fulgrim, it was more than a curiosity. It was a promise whispered in colours no mortal mind could fully grasp. The Legion's scholars argued endlessly over its origin. Some said it was a gift from the ruinous powers themselves. Others believed it an ancient key to lost knowledge. Fulgrim alone touched it without hesitation, feeling its seductive warmth pulse beneath his fingertips. That night, the visions returned with new intensity. The voice no longer spoke in riddles, but in commands. It beckoned him to embrace a new destiny, one beyond the Emperor's rigid laws, beyond the frailty of mortal men. Fulgrim wrestled with the growing urge. Was this a gift or a curse? The desire for transcendence warred with the loyalty that had defined him for centuries. He knew that to accept the relic's power fully would mark him and his legion forever. And yet, to refuse it might mean the death of the perfection he so dearly sought. The tension in his court rippled outward. Subtle changes in behavior, whispered conversations in shadowed alcoves, glances exchanged with knowing smirks. The perfect harmony of the Emperor's children was beginning to show dissonance. Julius confronted Fulgrim one evening beneath the vault of the starlit gallery, his voice barely masking his concern. "Primarch, you tread a dangerous path. We are soldiers of the Emperor, not poets chasing illusions. This artifact, it twists minds. It is not our destiny to be puppets of such whispers." Fulgrim's eyes gleamed with a quiet fire. "And yet, Julius, sometimes the puppeteer must become the master of the strings. Our fate need not be dictated by others." Their bond strained but held, a fragile thread between ambition and loyalty. As days passed, Fulgrim found himself increasingly isolated. His council became divided. Some embraced the promise of the relic, eager for the freedom it hinted at. Others recoiled in fear, clinging to the old ways. The Legion itself began to fracture beneath the weight of these competing visions. Yet Fulgrim's resolve only hardened. In the deep solitude of his quarters, he traced the intricate symbols etched into the relic's surface, whispering to himself the promises it made. A new dawn was coming, he told himself. A dawn forged not by the Emperor's hand, but by his own, and with it, a new era of perfection. The shadows lengthened across the halls of the pride of the Emperor, carrying with them a silence heavier than the void outside. The whispers had grown louder now, not just in Fulgrim's mind, but among those closest to him. The relic, once a secret fascination, had become a presence, an unseen influence weaving its tendrils through the hearts of the Emperor's children. Fulgrim's inner circle, once bound by shared purpose and loyalty, began to fracture. Subtle glances held veiled accusations. Conversation stopped when he entered the room. Even Eidolon, whose wisdom had long been a beacon in the gathering gloom, had become distant, his eyes clouded with worry and hidden knowledge. It was Julius Caesarion who first dared to speak plainly in the council chamber, his voice sharp against the heavy air. "Primarch," he said, "we stand on the edge of a precipice. The loyalty that has sustained us wavers. The relic's influence is a poison. seeping into the minds of our warriors. We risk losing everything we have built. Fulgrim regarded him calmly, the weight of the relic's cold promise resting against his chest like a second heartbeat. Poison or nectar, Julius? It is not for us to shy from what lies beyond the known. The Emperor's vision was greatness, yes, but greatness need not be shackled by fear. A murmur rose among the assembled captains. Some nodded in agreement, others tightened their grips on their weapons. Loyalty had always been a tempestuous thing. One moment a shield, the next a blade. That night, Fulgrim's dreams were no longer his own. The relic whispered visions of worlds bathed in impossible light, of beings whose forms were beauty incarnate and whose power bent reality itself. It showed him a path that led beyond death, beyond the limitations of flesh and time. But it also showed betrayal. Faces of those he once called brothers twisted in shadows, their smiles false, their hearts turned to ambitions that mirrored his own. The relic revealed that loyalty was not a bond unbreakable, but a thread easily severed. He awoke drenched in sweat, the relic cold against his skin as if mocking his torment. In the days that followed, small cracks grew wider. Julius confronted him again, but this time with a warning sharper than before. Beware the whispers, Fulgrim. They promise glory, but bring only ruin. To follow them is to forsake all that we are. Fulgrim's reply was slow, measured. Or perhaps to follow them is to become all that we could be, to transcend not just the Imperium's laws, but the very fate that binds us to mortality. Among the Legion, tension simmered. Some embraced the relic's power with fervor, their artistry growing more extravagant, their battles more ruthless. Others recoiled, uneasy with the transformation unfolding around them. Fulgrim's public addresses grew grander, suffused with a mysticism that unsettled even his most loyal followers. He spoke of perfection as a force not static but alive, a living flame that demanded sacrifice. Yet for all his vision, he could not silence the doubts that crept in during his rare moments of solitude. Was he the architect of a new dawn, or the herald of decay? And beneath it all, the galaxy itself seemed to mirror his inner turmoil. The warp churned with restless energy. Distant stars flickered uncertainly. Empires rose and fell like waves on a storm-tossed sea. In the stillness of a quiet chamber, Fulgrim traced the delicate veins of the relic, feeling its pulse align with his own. He whispered into the darkness, "Show me the path." And the darkness answered with a smile. The Emperor's children had always moved with grace and purpose, but now their steps echoed with a different cadence, one born of unrest and secret defiance. The great halls that once resonated with song and celebration now bore the chill of whispered doubt as the fragile unity within the Legion began to splinter. Fulgrim's speeches, once radiant with hope and the promise of transcendent beauty, took on an edge of sharpness. He spoke of evolution, of breaking the chains of convention and forging a new destiny beyond the Emperor's command. His words stirred the hearts of many, yet unsettled others who clung to the old ways. The political tension between the legions simmered beneath the surface of the Imperium. The Emperor's children, once admired for their artistry and discipline, were now viewed with wary eyes. Their obsession with perfection was whispered to border on decadence, their loyalty questioned in hushed tones. Within the pride of the Emperor, Julius Caesaron's unease had grown into outright concern. He sought private audience with Fulgrim beneath the vaulted ceilings of the starlit gallery, a sanctuary where the past seemed eternal and the weight of the present pressed hardest. "Primarch," Julius began, his voice low but resolute, Our pursuit of perfection must not blind us to our duty. The Emperor's will is not a chain, but a foundation. To defy it is to risk the ruin of all we have built. Fulgrim's gaze was distant, his thoughts tangled with the relentless voice of the relic still pulsing beneath his armor. And yet, Julius, a foundation that does not allow for growth becomes a prison. Our art, our battle, our very souls, should they not evolve beyond the stifling dictates of obedience? The tension between them was a reflection of the Legion's own fracture. Elsewhere, whispers of dissent grew into secret meetings. Allies questioned loyalties. Rivals sharpened their daggers in the shadows. The first open act of betrayal was subtle but seismic. A trusted captain, known for his unwavering loyalty, diverted a critical order during a campaign on the fringe worlds. His reasons were cloaked in honor, claiming to preserve the Legion's purity against the corrupting influence Fulgrim now embraced. When the betrayal was uncovered, Fulgrim's reaction was a study in controlled fury. He spared the captain's life, not from mercy, but from a desire to craft the moment into an example. The captain was made to endure a living punishment, a tableau of suffering and artistry that would haunt the memories of the Legion for decades. That night, Fulgrim stood alone before the viewport, watching a dying star collapse in slow, silent agony. The light faded, swallowed by an encroaching darkness that seemed to reach into the soul itself. He felt the weight of his choices settle like a shroud. The path to perfection was stained with the blood of loyalty betrayed, and the cost was higher than he had ever imagined. Yet, within the deep recesses of his mind, the voice of the relic whispered still, promising glory beyond all reckoning. Fulgrim closed his eyes and let the darkness enfold him. The war that Fulgrim's Legion waged was unlike any before. A brutal campaign against a Xenos empire of unsettling elegance and terrible cruelty. Their enemies, the Elysians of Vora Prime, were as obsessed with beauty as the Emperor's children themselves, their cities gleaming with spires of crystal and flesh melded with shimmering metal. They fought with an artistry that turned slaughter into a symphony, their warriors dancing through battlefields with balletic precision. Fulgrim watched from the bridge of the pride of the Emperor as the campaign unfolded. This was a war that spoke to his soul, though in ways he could not yet fully admit. He admired the aliens' dedication to aesthetics, their refusal to sacrifice form for function. They were mirrors to his own obsession, reflections of the beauty and madness intertwined within his Legion. But admiration soon gave way to doubt. The Elysians' ruthlessness contrasted starkly with the Emperor's rigid code. Where the Imperium demanded unwavering obedience, the Xenos embraced passion and creation, no matter the cost. Their architecture was breathtaking, their art hauntingly grotesque, their culture steeped in rituals that glorified both life and death. As the campaign dragged on, Fulgrim found himself drawn to a particular artifact captured in the ruins of Vora Prime's capital. It was unlike the relic that had first whispered to him. It pulsed with a cold, alien light, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to shift beneath his gaze. Against the strict orders of his advisors, Fulgrim claimed the artifact for himself, hiding it aboard his flagship. He saw in it not a weapon, but a key, a promise of a path beyond the Emperor's will. His captains protested, warning of the dangers such relics posed, temptations of the warp, snares of the ruinous powers. But Fulgrim's mind was made. To embrace this power was to forge a destiny unbound by the decay and stasis of the Imperium. Yet even as he hid the artifact, the seed of doubt took root among his closest allies. Julius Caesarion's warnings grew more urgent, his resolve hardening into opposition. The once harmonious council now echoed with conflict and fear. Fulgrim's resolve, however, did not waver. In private, he meditated upon the artifact, seeking the wisdom and power it promised. The alien light bled into his dreams, painting visions of a galaxy reshaped in the image of perfection, no longer a realm of rigid hierarchy and decay, but a living canvas of endless possibility. But with every vision came a whisper of sacrifice. The price of such transcendence was higher than mere loyalty or blood. It was the surrender of the self. On the eve of the final assault against Vora Prime's last bastion, Fulgrim convened his captains beneath the vaulted domes of his flagship's war chamber. His voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of unspoken promises. "We stand at the threshold of greatness," he declared, "not as slaves to the Emperor's will, but as architects of our own destiny. The path forward is clear. Perfection demands sacrifice, and sacrifice demands courage." The captains exchanged uncertain glances. Some nodded in fierce agreement. Others, like Julius, clenched their fists in silent defiance. As the assault commenced, the Legion fought with a ferocity that was both beautiful and terrible to behold. Their blades sang, their movements flawless. Yet beneath the surface, the old bonds of loyalty and honor began to unravel. Fulgrim, cloaked in the alien artifact's eerie glow, watched the battle from the shadows of his chamber. The campaign would be remembered not only for its victory, but as the moment the Emperor's children began to fall. The echoes of battle had barely faded before a new war raged within the hearts of the Emperor's children. The alien artifact Fulgrim had claimed pulsed with a quiet, insidious power, seeping into the dreams and waking thoughts of those closest to him. It was no longer merely a relic. It had become a presence, an unspoken force that began to warp the minds and wills of the Legion's leaders. Julius Caesarion, once the unshakable pillar of discipline, found his resolve tested as strange dreams crept into his nights. Visions of impossible beauty intertwined with whispers of power and freedom. He struggled to resist, but the relic's influence was subtle and relentless, playing on his deepest desires and fears. Eidolon, the keeper of histories, felt the artifact's pull as well, though he masked his turmoil beneath a veneer of scholarly detachment. In private, he confessed to Fulgrim his growing unease, warning that the Legion's pursuit of perfection was becoming an obsession that threatened to consume them all. Fulgrim himself was changed. The alien light that now infused his flesh was both a blessing and a curse. It granted him visions that spanned the stars, insights into the secrets of life and death, but also chained him to a destiny he could neither deny nor fully understand. In council chambers, the tension was palpable. The unity that had once defined the Emperor's children was fracturing. Captains whispered behind closed doors. Alliances formed and dissolved in the flicker of a glance. Fulgrim's word was law, but even he could not silence the growing discord. One evening, beneath the cold light of distant suns, Fulgrim made a choice that marked the point of no return. Against the Emperor's direct orders, he authorized a campaign into forbidden space, a realm of the galaxy steeped in ancient warp energies and long-forgotten secrets. His captains protested vehemently. Julius stood among them, voice heavy with warning. "Primarch, this path leads only to madness and ruin. The Emperor's will is clear. Such ventures are forbidden." But Fulgrim's eyes burned with a newfound intensity. The Emperor's will is not the boundary of truth. Beyond his vision lies the future we must claim. We will walk this path together, or not at all. The campaign was swift and brutal. The Emperor's children tore through the forbidden systems with relentless precision, claiming ancient relics and forbidden knowledge. Each victory was shadowed by the creeping corruption of the warp, a darkness that seeped into the very soul of the Legion. Fulgrim's closest allies began to change. Julius's defiance hardened into bitterness. Eidolon's detachment turned to despair. Others, seduced by the promises of the relic, embraced the transformation, their bodies and minds bending to alien will. The Legion was no longer a brotherhood, but a crucible of competing desires and dark whispers. Fulgrim stood at its center, both creator and prisoner of the fate he had chosen. As the campaign ended, Fulgrim returned to the pride of the Emperor, the alien artifact now fused with his very being. He looked upon his Legion, not with the pride of a father, but with the cold calculation of a ruler who knew the cost of his ambition. The question lingered like a shadow in his heart. Had he forged a path to transcendence, or walked willingly into ruin? The banners of the Emperor's children flew high, but the winds that carried them were no longer those of loyalty or honor. They were charged with a fierce defiance that echoed through the corridors of the galaxy. Fulgrim, now more than Primarch, more than legend, led his Legion into a campaign forbidden by the Emperor himself. The stars bore witness to a procession that was both triumphant and foreboding. Every world they conquered was painted with the exquisite brush of violence. Battlefields rendered with the precision of an artist's hand, each death a note in an unholy symphony. The Legion fought not for the Emperor's glory, but for the perfection Fulgrim pursued beyond the boundaries of command. This campaign was not just a war. It was a statement. It was the declaration of a new dawn, where beauty and power would reshape the galaxy. The whispers of the warp grew louder, weaving into the minds of the Emperor's children, promising ecstasy beyond the limits of flesh. The first signs of transformation were subtle. Warriors returned from the front lines with eyes shimmering like liquid silver, their bodies bearing markings that pulsed with a strange, vibrant light. The artistry of their mutations was terrifying in its grace. Limbs elongated, skin shimmered like polished glass, and voices sang with unnatural harmonies. Fulgrim stood amidst them, his own flesh alight with the alien energy that had become part of him. He spoke in tones both commanding and hypnotic, his speeches weaving prophecy with promise. "We are the harbingers of a new perfection," he declared before the gathered Legion. "We shall break free from the chains of the past and embrace the truth whispered in the stars. Our destiny is no longer bound by the Emperor's shadow, but illuminated by the light of our own making." But within this growing exaltation lurked unease. Not all embraced the changes with open arms. Some captains, hardened by years of war and discipline, resisted the tide, fearing the price of the path Fulgrim had chosen. Julius Caesaron's opposition became open defiance. He challenged Fulgrim not just in words but in deeds, rallying those who still held to the old ways. Yet each attempt to oppose the Primarch was met with both brutal retribution and cruel mercy, a twisted artistry of punishment that left survivors broken, reshaped, or consumed by madness. Amidst the chaos, the whispers of Slaanesh grew into a roar. The ruinous power of excess and pleasure called out to the Emperor's children, offering release from the torment of their endless striving. Fulgrim, torn between his ambition and the encroaching corruption, found himself seduced by the promise of ultimate transcendence. One night, in the solitude of his chamber, the alien artifact, now fused into his very being, spoke in a voice both sweet and terrible. It promised power beyond reckoning, the immortality of gods, and a legacy that would eclipse the Emperor's own. Fulgrim hesitated. The weight of his decisions pressed down like 1,000 suns. Yet the lure of perfection was a siren song, impossible to resist. With a final breath, he chose. The campaign that followed was a storm of fire and blood. The Emperor's children struck with a fury unmatched, their bodies and minds forever altered by the dark gifts they had embraced. They were no longer mere warriors. They were living icons of excess and transformation. And as the stars wept silent tears, Fulgrim's voice rose above the tumult, a herald not of salvation, but of inevitable downfall. The once proud Emperor's children had become a tempest unleashed upon the stars, warriors transformed, bodies and souls twisted by the insidious touch of the relic and the dark power that whispered from the warp. Their songs of beauty had turned to screams of ecstasy and despair, a cacophony that echoed across battlefields drenched in both blood and starlight. Fulgrim moved through his legion like a god walking among mortals, his form radiant with unearthly light, his eyes burning with the fire of ambitions both divine and damned. The artifact fused with his flesh sang a haunting melody, a promise of endless perfection. But beneath its allure lay a growing shadow of doubt and regret. His closest allies were no longer the brothers he had once trusted, but reflections of the Legion's fractured soul. Julius Caesaron, hardened and embittered, led a faction in open rebellion, seeking to preserve what remained of the Legion's honor and resist the seductive decay. Their clashes were no longer just ideological, but brutal confrontations, tearing at the fabric of the Emperor's children. Meanwhile, those who had embraced the dark gifts of the warp reveled in excess and transformation, their bodies becoming living art, monuments to both beauty and horror. The boundary between creation and destruction blurred as they succumbed to the intoxicating call of Slaanesh. Amidst the chaos, a secret threat emerged, a shadow lurking beyond even the corruption of the warp. The Imperium, alarmed by rumors of the Emperor's children's descent, sent inquisitors and assassin legions to root out heresy. Their silent, deadly interventions sowed further mistrust and paranoia within the Legion. Fulgrim's mind was a battlefield itself. The voice of the artifact promised salvation through transcendence, while the echoes of his former self, loyal, proud, and bound to the Emperor, cried out in anguish. He found solace only in the visions that danced just beyond his grasp, promises of a future where pain and sacrifice were but the necessary steps toward divine perfection. But with each victory, the cost grew heavier. Worlds fell silent, their beauty marred by the excesses of war. Brothers turned against brothers. The dream of a perfect legion became a nightmare written in flesh and blood. One fateful night, under the blood-red light of a dying star, Fulgrim confronted Julius in a final parley. The chamber was silent, except for the hum of alien power coursing through Fulgrim's veins and the cold steel of Julius's blade. "Your path is a betrayal of all we swore to uphold," Julius said, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. "You have become the very thing we fought to destroy." Fulgrim's gaze was unyielding, his smile both cruel and sad. "I have become what was always meant to be, the architect of a new perfection. You cling to the past, Julius, but the future belongs to those who dare to transcend." Their confrontation ended not with steel, but with a bitter rift that shattered the Legion's unity. Julius and his followers fled, vowing to fight against the darkness that had claimed their brethren. Fulgrim stood alone amidst the ruins of his dreams, the artifact's song, now a symphony of both hope and despair. The Emperor's children had begun their tragic descent, a fall from grace that would echo through the annals of the galaxy for millennia to come. The galaxy watched in silence as the Emperor's children tore themselves apart, a shattered masterpiece fracturing under the weight of ambition and corruption. Worlds once vibrant with life now lay desolate, their skies torn by the storms of war and the twisted energies of the warp. The Emperor's children, once the shining example of martial grace and perfection, had become harbingers of decay and excess. Fulgrim, now a figure both feared and worshipped, walked the edge of madness and divinity. The alien artifact fused into his very being pulsed with a dark vitality, its whispers constant companions in the emptiness of his nights. The promise of transcendence remained just out of reach, a horizon that receded as he chased it deeper into the shadows. His legion was divided as never before. Julius Caesaron and his followers, branded traitors and exiles, waged a guerrilla war to reclaim the honor they believed lost. Their strikes were precise, a deadly dance of vengeance and despair that cut through the bloated excess of their former brethren. Meanwhile, the corrupted followers of Fulgrim plunged further into excess, their transformations grotesque yet mesmerizing. Limbs elongated into weapons, eyes bloomed with unnatural colors, and voices rose in haunting chants that echoed the siren call of Slanesh. The battlefield was a twisted gallery of flesh and steel, a living nightmare crafted by a god who had fallen from grace. Fulgrim himself faced new challenges beyond the physical. The Imperium's agents had not forgotten the Legion's rebellion. Inquisitors, clad in shadow and fury, descended upon the scattered worlds once held by the Emperor's children. Their purpose was clear: to extinguish the heresy before it could spread like a plague. One such agent, the silent assassin known only as Vespera, became a shadow in Fulgrim's war-torn domain. Her blade struck without warning, her presence a ghostly whisper in the chaos. She sought to sever the source of the corruption, to end the tragedy before it could consume the galaxy. Fulgrim's visions grew darker still. The artifact now revealed glimpses of a final reckoning, a battle not just for the soul of the Emperor's children, but for the fate of the galaxy itself. It showed him a throne carved from stars, drenched in light and shadow, where he would stand as both god and monster. Haunted by these visions, Fulgrim's resolve hardened. He convened a conclave deep within the labyrinthine bowels of the pride of the Emperor. His voice, once filled with hope and promise, now rang with the cold steel of inevitability. "The hour of our rebirth approaches," he declared. "We will not be broken by the past or the Emperor's judgment. We shall rise, perfected and unbound, or we shall fall into legend." The gathering was fractured. Some hearts beat with fierce loyalty, others with fear and doubt. Yet all were bound by the inescapable gravity of destiny. As the conclave dispersed, Fulgrim's eyes met those of Vespera, standing unseen in the shadows, a silent promise that the final act was yet to unfold. The war drums of the final conflict echoed through the void, their distant thunder a grim herald of the fate that awaited the Emperor's children. The shattered remnants of the Legion had become a storm of fury and despair, torn between devotion to their fallen Primarch and the relentless pull of corruption that clawed at their souls. Fulgrim, his flesh fused with the alien artifact's cold light, stood at the helm of the pride of the Emperor, his eyes reflecting the burning stars of a dying galaxy. The weight of centuries pressed upon him, a burden both eternal and suffocating. The promise of perfection, once a beacon of hope, now flickered like a candle in a tempest. The final assault was a tempest of fire and steel, as the Emperor's children clashed with the forces of the Imperium sent to purge them. The skies above the ruined worlds burned with the fury of shattered legions, the cries of battle mingling with the haunting melodies of the warp's excess. Julius Caesaron led the Loyalists with a fierce resolve, striking from the shadows to undermine Fulgrim's corrupted forces. His loyalty was a blade sharpened by betrayal and loss, a last stand for a legion that once had been a beacon of honor. Amid the chaos, Fulgrim confronted Julius in a desolate cathedral, its once majestic hall shattered and stained with the echoes of forgotten prayers. Their battle was a tempest of clashing wills and shattered steel, a dance of brothers torn apart by fate. "You were my first captain," Fulgrim whispered, his voice a blend of sorrow and fury. "And now you stand against me. Is this the perfection we sought?" Julius's eyes burned with unyielding fire. "Perfection is not this corruption, this decay. I fight for what remains of our honor, for the Emperor, and for the souls we have lost." The clash ended not with death, but with a broken silence. Julius fell to his knees, defeated but unbroken. Fulgrim, weary and changed beyond recognition, extended a hand, not in mercy, but as a symbol of the choice before them. The war that followed was a symphony of sacrifice and destruction. Brothers fell, worlds burned, and the fragile threads of loyalty unraveled completely. The Emperor's children, once the shining jewel of the Imperium, became a legend of tragedy, a warning whispered in the dark corners of the galaxy. Fulgrim's final act was both defiant and despairing. As the pride of the Emperor was consumed by enemy fire, he unleashed the last of the relic's power, a blinding burst of light that shattered the boundaries between life and death. When the smoke cleared, the Primarch was gone. Some say he transcended mortal form, becoming a being of pure energy and beauty. Others believe he was consumed, his soul lost to the dark currents of the warp. The Emperor's children survived, but forever changed. Their tale was one of brilliance and ruin, a testament to the cost of ambition and the fragile nature of perfection. The echoes of Fulgrim's final act reverberated through the shattered remnants of the Emperor's children, a silence heavy with loss and unspoken questions. The Legion, once united in pursuit of an impossible ideal, now drifted like fractured stars, their light dimmed but not extinguished. The galaxy itself seemed to mourn the passing of the Primarch, his name whispered with reverence and fear in the darkest corners of the Imperium. Some hailed him as a martyr to perfection, others as a cautionary tale of hubris and corruption. In the aftermath, the remaining captains struggled to forge a path forward. Without Fulgrim's guiding presence, the Legion became a shadow of its former glory, a gathering of broken wills and fractured loyalties. The vision of transcendence that had burned so fiercely was now a flickering flame threatened by despair and betrayal. Julius Caesaron emerged as a reluctant leader, his heart burdened by the cost of survival. He sought to restore honor and purpose, to rekindle the flame of loyalty amidst the ashes. But his efforts were met with resistance. Some embraced the legacy of excess and transformation, unwilling to surrender to the old ways. The Imperium's gaze remained unrelenting. Inquisitors and assassin legions continued their crusade against the remnants of the Emperor's children, their missions merciless and unyielding. The Legion became hunted prey, forced into hiding and subterfuge among the stars. Amidst the turmoil, whispers of dark gifts and forbidden knowledge persisted. Some within the Legion sought to reclaim the power of the alien artifact, believing it held the key to restoring their lost glory. Others feared its corruption and sought to destroy it before it could claim more souls. Julius grappled with these opposing forces, his own soul weighed down by doubt and regret. He walked a path between salvation and damnation, struggling to hold together the fraying bonds of brotherhood. In moments of solitude, he would gaze upon the stars, seeking answers in their cold light. He wondered if perfection was ever truly attainable, or if it was a cruel illusion that led only to ruin. The story of the Emperor's children became a legend of tragedy and warning, of beauty and madness entwined in an eternal dance. It was a tale told in hushed tones across the galaxy, a reminder that even the greatest can fall, and that ambition carries a price beyond reckoning. And beneath the shattered skies, the silent question remained: would the Emperor's children rise again, or were they forever doomed to wander the void as ghosts of a lost perfection? The years stretched into centuries, and the Emperor's children became whispers on the winds of war, ghosts of a time when perfection was a dream both exalted and cursed. Their once proud banners, now tattered and faded, flew over forgotten worlds, scarred by ambition and betrayal. Julius Caesaron, burdened by the weight of survival, walked a lonely path. His body bore the marks of countless battles, his soul etched with the scars of loss. He was a leader without a legion, a captain clinging to the fading echoes of a brotherhood that had shattered beneath the weight of dreams too vast to hold. Yet, in the darkest nights, when the stars themselves seemed to weep, Julius still heard the faint call of the alien artifact, its promise of power and transcendence lingering like a shadow upon his mind. He wrestled with the temptation to seize it, to reclaim what was lost, and forge a new destiny from the ashes. But each time he reached toward that darkness, memories rose like ghosts, the faces of fallen brothers, the twisted beauty and horror that had consumed them, and the haunting smile of Fulgrim, forever caught between godhood and ruin. In secret, Julius gathered those few who remained loyal to the old ways, warriors who believed in honor and discipline, who sought redemption rather than excess. Together, they wove a fragile alliance, a flicker of light in the encroaching gloom. Their struggle was not only against external enemies, the relentless Imperium hunting the remnants, but against the very nature of their own existence. The shadow of the relic's corruption was never far, a constant reminder of the cost of ambition and the fragility of perfection. Amidst the ruins of a forgotten battlefield, Julius stood before a shattered monument, once a symbol of the Emperor's children's glory, now a tombstone for their dreams. He traced the cracked stone with fingers worn by time and pain. "We were never meant to be gods," he whispered, voice heavy with regret. "But perhaps, in our fall, there is a lesson for those who come after." The stars above flickered like distant candles, cold and indifferent to the struggles of mortals. Yet somewhere in the void, the echoes of the Emperor's children's song persisted, a haunting melody of beauty, loss, and the eternal search for meaning. And though the galaxy moved on, the story of Fulgrim and his legion remained, a tragic refrain, a warning, and a testament to the fragile line between ambition and ruin. The shadows cast by the past loomed ever larger as the remnants of the Emperor's children faced a reckoning not just from the Imperium, but from within themselves. The fragile peace Julius Caesaron sought was shattered by the arrival of an ancient emissary, one bearing a message both dire and irresistible. From the depths of the warp came the herald of Slaanesh, a being of unimaginable beauty and horror. Cloaked in shifting colors that danced like liquid fire, the emissary spoke in a voice that both soothed and tore at the soul. "You who cling to faded honor," it whispered. "You who resist the inevitable tide of transcendence, embrace the gift that was denied to you. Fulgrim's legacy is not ruin, but a doorway to eternal perfection." The emissary's presence ignited a tempest within the Legion. Some saw in its words the salvation they craved, a path to reclaim the power lost with their Primarch's disappearance. Others recoiled, fearing the deeper corruption that came with such a pact. Julius stood at the center of this storm, his heart torn between hope and despair. The weight of leadership pressed upon him, but more crushing still was the knowledge that the line between redemption and damnation was thinner than ever. In the darkened halls of the pride of the Emperor's remnants, the debate raged. Voices raised in fervor and fear, dreams and nightmares colliding. The Legion's fate hung in the balance. Amidst the turmoil, a secret faction moved in silence. Those who sought to destroy the alien artifact forever, fearing its power would drag the Emperor's children into eternal servitude to the ruinous powers. Julius confronted the emissary in a secluded chamber, the air thick with the scent of ozone and shadow. "Your gifts come with chains," he declared. "We seek freedom, not enslavement." The emissary's smile was both cruel and eternal. "Freedom is an illusion, mortal. Perfection requires sacrifice. Will you pay the price, or crumble beneath the weight of your own weakness?" The answer came not in words, but in action. The Legion fractured anew, brothers turning on brothers, each choice carving deeper wounds in the soul of the Emperor's children. Fulgrim's legacy, once a beacon of hope, now threatened to consume all in its path. The final chapter was approaching, a reckoning where only the strongest or the most desperate would survive. And as the stars watched silently, the fate of an empire and the soul of a Primarch teetered on the edge of oblivion. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and burning flesh. The once proud halls of the pride of the Emperor now echoing with the clash of steel and the cries of the broken. The final storm had come, the culmination of decades of ambition, betrayal, and ruin. The Emperor's children were no longer a legion, but a fractured shadow of their former glory, torn apart by internal strife and external assault. Fulgrim's legacy hung over them like a spectre, his promises of perfection turned into chains that bound their souls. The alien artifact, now a blazing core of dark power, pulsated with a terrible light that threatened to consume everything it touched. Julius Caesaron moved like a ghost through the battlefield, his once pristine armor scarred and bloodied, his resolve forged in the crucible of loss. He led the loyalists in a desperate stand against the corrupted and those seduced by the whispers of Slaanesh. The war was not merely physical, but spiritual, a battle for the soul of the Emperor's children. Brothers who once fought side by side now faced each other across blood-soaked fields, their weapons singing dirges of betrayal. In the heart of the conflict, Julius confronted the emissary of the warp once more. The being's form shimmered and shifted, its voice a melody of temptation and despair. "You resist the inevitable, but your fate is sealed," it intoned. "Embrace the gift, or perish in the void." Julius's eyes burned with fierce determination. "We are not your puppets. Our will is our own, forged in honor and sacrifice." The clash was cataclysmic, the forces of loyalty and corruption colliding with the fury of dying stars. The pride of the Emperor shuddered under the strain, its systems failing as the battle reached its zenith. Amidst the chaos, Julius made a choice that would define the future of the Legion. With a cry that echoed through the void, He shattered the alien artifact, releasing a blinding wave of energy that scorched the battlefield and silenced the whispers of the warp. The cost was immense. Many fell in the blast, and Julius himself was gravely wounded. Yet in that moment of sacrifice, the tide turned. The remaining loyalists rallied, pushing back against the darkness that had consumed their brethren. The aftermath was a bitter victory. The Emperor's children were broken, their legacy forever marked by tragedy and sacrifice. Julius, bloodied but unbowed, vowed to rebuild, not in pursuit of perfection, but in remembrance of what was lost. As the stars slowly reclaimed their cold dominion, the survivors looked to the future with cautious hope, knowing that the scars of ambition would forever shape their path. The stars had long ceased to shine with the brilliance they once held. The galaxy, vast and indifferent, carried the weight of countless wars, each a whisper in the endless void. Among these whispers, the tale of the Emperor's children and their fallen Primarch echoed as a mournful lament, a song of glory turned to ash. Julius Caesar, now a shadow of the warrior he had been, stood alone upon a barren world. The ruins of an ancient temple crumbled beneath a sky of dying suns, its stones etched with the scars of forgotten battles. Here, far from the reach of the Imperium's gaze, he sought the fragile peace that had eluded him for centuries. The alien artifact, the source of so much ruin, lay shattered, its fragments buried beneath the dust. The power that once promised transcendence had become a curse, a reminder of ambition's cost. Julius's hands trembled as he touched the cold stone, memories flooding back. Visions of Fulgrim's radiant smile, the legion's rise, and their inevitable fall. Immortality had been their dream, but it had become their torment. To live beyond time was to witness the endless cycle of creation and destruction, to carry the burden of every lost brother, every shattered world. Julius's voice broke the silence, a prayer lost to the winds. We sought to be gods among mortals, but in doing so, we forgot what it meant to be human. Our perfection was a mask, hollow, fragile. The galaxy moved on, indifferent to the fate of those who had dared to challenge its harsh truths. The Emperor's children faded into legend, an epic tale of brilliance and ruin, of beauty and madness intertwined. Yet even in their fall, there was a seed of hope. The survivors, scattered and broken, carried the lessons of their past, the price of ambition, the weight of loyalty, and the cost of sacrifice. As the last light of the dying suns flickered and faded, Julius closed his eyes, surrendering to the silence. The era of the Emperor's children was over, but their story would endure, a testament to the fragile line between glory and ruin. And so, beneath the cold gaze of distant stars, an empire fell, a hero was lost, and the galaxy whispered its eternal refrain. Perfection is a path paved with sacrifice, and every rise carries within it the shadow of a fall.